So, why are David and his men, why are they fasting in this particular instance? Yeah.
Because the king had been killed.
The king had been killed, exactly. Yeah, Saul is killed.
Sword and Jonathan's before that, right?
Jonathan's killed, Saul is killed, and all the people of the house of Judah and the house of Israel and so on, everybody's dead. So they're fasting because they're sad, right? So in this case, the fasting is part of their mourning. Not only are they fasting, they're tearing their clothes, they're weeping. In fact, in antiquity, people were very almost extravagant about their weeping. In fact, so much so that in ancient Athens, they made laws about how much you were allowed to show your grief at funerals. Because people were tearing out their hair and gouging out their eyes and all sorts of things. And so ancient Athens and ancient Rome as well, they actually made laws saying you can show this much grief, but no more than that. This is enough, right? So one of the ways that people are showing their grief is through fasting. So fasting has an association with sadness, with penitence, right? And as we go into Great Lent, what sadness are we heading towards?
Crucifixion.
The crucifixion, exactly. So we too are fasting in mourning, right? In mourning of Christ. In the book of Esther, Esther is a young Jewish woman who lives in the capital city of the Persian Empire, in Susa. And she ends up actually marrying the emperor, Xerxes, and then there's a plot to kill off all of the Jewish people that are living there, and she foils the plot. But one of the ways she has to foil the plot is to go into the presence of the emperor, which was punishable by death. Apparently he really didn't want to be disturbed, so he would kill anyone that came and bothered him. And the passage goes, "Then Esther dispatched the one who came to Mordecai, saying, 'Go and assemble together the Jews in Susa. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 full days and 3 full nights. I and my maids will also fast. Then I will go to the king contrary to the law, even if I am to perish.' So Mordecai went and did all that Esther commanded him." So Esther is going to go into the presence of the king, which is probably going to go poorly. But how is she trying to give herself a better chance? What is the fasting here? What is the purpose of it?
Like a cleansing.
Like a cleansing, exactly. She is about to undertake on a momentous undertaking. This is something important. Not only is she going to go and visit the king, which is itself something important, she is doing so in order to save her people from destruction. So she's undertaking a very momentous activity. And in order to prepare herself for that, she's going to fast, along with all the Jews in Susa and with her handmaidens. And notice, what does this fast look like? We get a little bit of a instruction about what fasting kind of looks like here. What is her fasting like? Complete. Sorry, go ahead.
A complete fasting for 3 full days and 3 full nights.
Yeah, and she drinks nothing and eats nothing for 3 full days and 3 full nights. When do we fast completely before we undertake something momentous? The Eucharist, when we take communion, right? Talk about going in front of a king, right? This is just a human king. When we take the Eucharist, we go in front of the King of Heaven, infinitely more powerful, infinitely more great than the Emperor Xerxes. And so we too, when we're about to go into his presence, we fast. Not for 3 days and 3 full nights, thank goodness, right? But from midnight on, at the least, we fast. In Nehemiah, which is a book that chronicles the return of the people of Israel from Persia, if you recall, they were defeated in battle by the Emperor Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and then deported. Everybody was deported to Babylon, which is where, like, for example, the book of Daniel takes place. The Babylonians were then conquered by the Medes, and then the Medes were conquered by the Persians. It was a very exciting time of everybody conquering everybody else. When the Persians take over, they tell all the peoples that had been displaced that you can go home now. And so the Jews return to their homeland and start rebuilding. And one of the books that chronicles this is Nehemiah. And in Nehemiah 1, 4-7, it says, "So it was, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept, and I mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And I said, No, indeed, O Lord, the mighty, the great, and the awesome God of heaven, who keeps the covenant and mercy for those who love him, and who keep his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open, that you may hear the prayer of your servant, which I pray before you now day and night, for the children of Israel, your servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we sinned against you. Both I and my father's house have sinned. We have departed from you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, nor ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses." So what is this passage of Nehemiah? What is he saying?
He's praying, isn't it, before he intercedes with the king? Isn't he the cupbearer?
Yeah, this is his prayer. He is praying to God. And what is his prayer about? What is he praying for?
Return to Israel. Or return to...
This is where they want to return to.
They want to return, but part of their return is he saying, all right, God, it's been enough time. We've been really good. Let us go home. What is he saying?
humility.
He is humble. He is asking for forgiveness. So he's fasting and he is asking for forgiveness in humility of God, right? And through this humility and through what goes with it, the fasting and the praying, he is hoping that God will have mercy on the people of Israel. Again, David gets into a lot of trouble with God periodically. And one of the times he gets into trouble is when he falls in love with somebody else's wife. And he decides, well, I'm the king, and it's good to be the king, so I'm going to get rid of this guy. His name was Uriah. He was a Hittite. And he doesn't kill him directly, but does anyone remember what he does to Uriah the Hittite? Yeah, they were assaulting a city, and he puts them in the front of the army, and of course, the first few ranks of those people very rarely survived, so he dies, and then he marries the widow, the woman Bathsheba. God was not very happy about this, and so David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. However, because by this deed you have greatly provoked the enemies of the Lord, your son, who is born to you, shall surely die. Then Nathan departed to his house. And the Lord made feeble the child that Uriah's wife bore to David, and it became ill. David therefore sought after God for the child, and he fasted and went in and lay on the ground in sackcloth. When you're going through the Bible and looking at passages in which there's fasting, you'll notice that a lot of them involve sackcloth. What is sackcloth? It's the cloth that sacks are made out of, right? And it's not very comfortable. It's very itchy. And so in order to show contrition, in order to show humility, they would put off, especially the kings, would put off their fine robes and all that stuff, and they would put on clothing made of this sackcloth. Very often you also see they put ashes in their hair and things like that as well. What is David fasting? What is the purpose of his fasting here? Penance. And penance in hopes of what? forgiveness, and so that God will spare the life of his son, right? Because God says to him, you have sinned, you're not going to die, but your son will. And he fasts and prays, asking for God's forgiveness and for God's mercy on his son. Who is his son? Does this work? It's Solomon, right? He's the son of Bathsheba.
That's all was the next step.
Was it the next son?
Yeah, that one.
Oh, I'm sorry, this one died. Well, it didn't work then. Doesn't always work. In Joel, now says the Lord your God, turn to me with all your heart, with fasting and wailing and with mourning. Rend your heart and not your garments. Return to the Lord your God, for he is merciful and compassionate. What does it mean to rend your heart and not your garments?
Yeah, just have more love, and then they usually tear their garments when it's like blasphemy and stuff like that, so instead of blasphemy, tear your heart. I
Yeah,
don't know if that makes sense. But you know what I mean? Like, when you tear your garments, isn't it because something bad?
yeah, exactly.
But if you tear your heart or your, something about love or like your heart melting, just like your heart melting or something.
Like the true feeling.
That's just what I'm
Like your
thinking.
true feeling, exactly. Right? It's easy to rip something, right? But you actually have to feel it in your heart. It can't just be an outward sign. And part of that is the fasting. It has to be something true. Jonah after he gets spat out by the sea monster, goes to the city of Nineveh, which is, in case you're ever asked this on a quest, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And this was a city that was well known for its sinfulness, for how the brutality with which the Assyrians would treat conquered peoples and so forth. So, and part of the northern kingdom had been destroyed by the Assyrians. So there was no love lost between the Jews and the people of Assyria. And he goes and he tells them, God is going to destroy your city. And what's their reaction? And the men of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least. Then the word came to the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, removed his robe, and put on sackcloth, and sat upon ashes. So here again, right, more sackcloth, more ashes. Once again, what is the fasting here in relationship with? Repentance, penitence, and humility. The king of Assyria, right, the king of Nineveh, is at this point the most powerful person in the entire world. They defeated the Egyptians, they defeated the Babylonians, they defeated everyone with whom they came in contact with. So this ruler would have every right to consider himself untouchable. I'm the best, I'm the greatest. The rulers of this time period came up with very fancy titles for themselves, right? Not the Assyrians, but the Persians, for example, had the great title, the Shah Shahan, which is the King of Kings, which, of course, is not the King of Persia, but God, right? So this, then, for the king of Assyria to get up from his throne, to descend from the place where his throne was. Usually they were on like a pedestal, so that you were higher than everyone else. And to sit upon ashes, to put on sackcloth, and to fast. A sign of extreme humility. And God listens. Fasting also happens in the New Testament. And in Acts, it says, as they ministered to the Lord and fasted, The Holy Spirit said, "Now separate to me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." Then, having fasted and prayed and laid hands on them, they sent them away. What is, in the New Testament, the laying on of hands, what does that mean usually when you're laying hands on someone? Sorry?
Praying.
Okay, you're praying over them? For what usually?
For healing.
Sometimes for healing. They're laying hands on people a lot, but in this case, right, it's a type of ordination, right? They're ordaining them to a certain mission, and then they send them away. And that is in association with fasting. Once again, remember when Esther was fasting to go into the king's chambers to speak with him, she's fasting in order to undertake something momentous. The same thing is happening here. They're going to undertake something momentous. They're going to be ordaining someone, and so they're fasting. And the same thing here in Acts 14. So when they had appointed elders in every church and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. So again, they're undertaking something important, a great task, and part of that is praying and fasting. Moses was someone who undertook a very great task. For example, the writing down of the Ten Commandments. That was a pretty important thing. And he also fasted before he does this. So he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He neither ate bread nor drank water. He wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the Ten Commandments. I've never personally tried to fast from all food and all drink for 40 days. I assume it would not go well for me if I tried to do that. Why is Moses able to do this?
He was there with the Lord.
He was there with the Lord, exactly. He was there with the Lord, and with God's strength, he is able to undertake this type of a fast. I certainly wouldn't recommend eating nothing from now until Easter. We see another type of fasting, right? We've seen a couple of times the type of fasting where you eat nothing. Here's another type that we see. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no desirable food. No meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself until 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. So this is the type of fasting that we do when? Wednesdays, Fridays, Lent, Advent, right, for the Panagia in August. We eat no meat, we eat no desirable food, no wine. This is another type of fasting. This isn't a full no eating of anything fast, but one where there are certain foods which you don't partake of. This is not from Exodus, but moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces that they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in secret. Why would we have a sad countenance when we fast?
Well, something you enjoy or something you're giving up to.
It's not the most pleasant of times of the year, right? Is the fasting period. So, however, we're told we shouldn't be like that. We shouldn't go around with a sad countenance. We shouldn't be scowling all the time. We shouldn't periodically kick something and say, "Oh, I wish I had some meat," or something like that. Part of it too is that in the time of Christ, the Pharisees in particular were very vocal about how much they were fasting. Do you remember the story of the publican and the Pharisee told by Christ, and he stands in the temple and he's like, "I fast twice a week and I'm amazing. Look at me, how wonderful I am at this." Well, the Pharisees would go around and whenever they were fasting, they wouldn't anoint themselves with oil, which in ultimately means they wouldn't bathe. They wouldn't they wouldn't do anything fun. They would scowl a lot, and they really wanted people to see that they were doing the fasting, right? And so, what kind of a reaction does that get from people?
Is it like oh, good for you, or, like, you're getting recognized,
Yeah.
which you're not supposed to be, you let the word recognition.
They're getting recognized. The people see how much they're fasting and say, wow, you guys must be super holy to do all this fasting. And they have their reward from that recognition. So they don't get the reward from their Father, who sees in secret and will reward openly. They get their reward from all of the people who say, wow, you guys are awesome. Sorry, was your hand up?
Yeah, you said this was not from Exodus.
This isn't Exodus. I think this is Matthew, possibly.
Matthew.
Sorry? Oh, no, that's all right.
So it's the same thing that we had with Joel then, where it's rend your heart, not your garment.
Yeah,
Don't
rend your
show
heart,
what
not your garment. Do it internally. And in just a moment, I'll hand it over to Subdeacon David, who will tell us a little bit about how that works. But just a historical note about the fast of Great Lent. Why do we fast for Lent? We talked about, well, we're doing this in mourning for Christ on the Christ crucifixion. But there's another reason that we fast for Great Lent. We were talking about how fasting always accompanied great, important things. Well, traditionally, people were baptized a couple of times a year. One of them was for Pascha, on Easter. And so, before they were baptized, they're going into perhaps the most important day of their lives, being baptized. So they were fasting beforehand for 40 days. And that's why we have the fast for Great Lent, why that's 40 days long. We're fasting alongside the catechumens as they prepare for baptism. And with that, I will hand it over to Subdeacon David.
So, Dr. Nicholas was so kind to introduce to us fasting in the Holy Scriptures. And fasting in the Holy Scriptures is fairly straightforward, as Nick showed us. The Scriptures are clear about what fasting means. It's abstaining from food generally. But the Fathers offer us a bit more insight into how we're supposed to fast and how we're supposed to carry out our fast. Because it's easy for us to just say, okay, we're going to cut ourselves off from meat and dairy and do all these things and woohoo. But then the evil one comes along, like we've been talking about, and he starts throwing thoughts into our ears and saying, oh, look how good you are, you're fasting. Or he'll say, oh, are you really going to eat that? That's so lavish. Ooh, look at you. So the evil one can come in and he can destroy our fasts very easily. So let's look at the writings of the Fathers to help us make it through the fast. St. Ambrose of Orthodox says that people have to answer greatly for not keeping the rules of the church with respect to the fast. People justify themselves by saying that they never considered it a sin to eat dairy products during the fast. They repent and consider themselves sinners in every other respect, but they do not think to repent about not keeping the fast. Meanwhile, they are transgressing the commandment of our Holy Mother, the Church, and according to the teaching of the Apostle Paul, they are as the heathen and publicans because of their disobedience. So we're hearing here that St. Ambrose tells us fasting is about obedience. So the Scriptures don't really say any of that. So why are we saying that fasting has to do with obedience? Well, the Scriptures don't tell us specifically to fast during the periods where we're fasting. The Scriptures don't tell us fast for the Mother of God. Like Nick told us, we fast before a great momentous period in the life of the church. So the church tells us, hey, wake up. We're about to do something really important here. Cut off all the meat, cut off all the dairy, cut off alcohol, cut off all of these things in our lives that we don't really need, and see what it means to live and experience the fast alongside Christ. You see, A lot of elderly people, for example, won't be able to finish the fast the same way as a younger person would. They might still need to be able to eat meat. They might still need to have certain kinds of dairy or something like that. That person, though, might be fasting more fully than the person who comes to the church every week, keeps the fast fully, but yet doesn't keep Christ in their heart. You see, if we're not fasting out of obedience and love for Christ and His church, then we're not really fasting. You know, if we're just fasting to say, this is what the church does, we're going to all fast now, and it's miserable, but yeah, we do it. If that's our attitude towards fasting, maybe with asking our spiritual father, it might be better for us not to fast. Maybe fasting would be an even bigger cross for us. So St. Ambrose reminds us that fasting has to do with obedience. So during the fast period, when we find ourselves kind of, dragging our feet and saying, okay, I guess I'll eat potatoes for the 5th day this week. When we're at that point of the fast, it's important to remember that we're doing this for obedience. We're doing this because Christ, the same way that He was obedient to the Father in fulfilling the will to be crucified on the cross, that's the same way that each of us has to be obedient. Blessed Ephraim of Arizona tells us that fasting is an exceptional virtue. It represses bodily impulses and gives strength to the soul to fight against the poisoning of the heart through the senses, and provides it with a remedy against any past poisoning. So, you remember when we talked about prayer last week, and we talked about how our thoughts can be a really big obstruction towards our ability to pray well? Well, fasting helps us to defeat the thoughts. Fasting, even more so, helps us to conquer the flesh. So all of the passions that have to do with the flesh, whether that is overeating, the carnal passions, whatever it might be, fasting helps to subdue all of that. Because now our flesh physically is going to become weaker. A lot of people like to say, I saw somebody advertising something about the Athonite diet, and I guess there's a whole book written about this now, and how, look at these monks on the holy mountain. They don't eat meat and dairy, and look at this. They're the healthiest people on earth. No, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It has nothing to do with that. Actually, during the fast, we should feel weaker. We should feel less energetic. We should feel almost like we are depriving ourselves of something, because we are. We're depriving ourselves of the things that give our body life, so that we can fill ourselves instead with the prayer that gives our soul life. So while in this world we have our soul and our body, a lot of times we let that balance get out of whack. We let our bodies take too much control. We neglect our souls for so long, and we worry about our bodies. And so by worrying about our bodies, we make our soul into this little thing that's sitting in the corner, like, hey, over here, can somebody please give me a little bit of attention? That's what the fast does. It finally gives our soul that attention. So we take from the body and we give to the soul. Because we're equal parts. We're body and soul, and not one is greater or lesser than the other. And so in fasting, we find that balance again. We find that, and we give our souls the ability to pray again. Elder Ephraim continues saying, fasting causes the mind to be cleansed constantly. It withers up every evil thought and brings healthy, godly thoughts, holy thoughts that enlighten the mind and kindle it with more zeal and spiritual fervor. So Elder Ephraim reminds us that during the fast, when we are praying and when we feel ourselves attacked by the evil one, maybe that a good thing for us to do would be to embolden ourselves in the fast, to become more strengthened in the fast. And it's important for us to remember when we're fasting, just as Nick mentioned, is to keep a happy countenance, to go about it really happily. A lot of times, I'll say it for myself, when I come in on Wednesday, it's like, oh, there's no cheese, there's no meat, oh, okay. It's disappointing. The fast is disappointing. It's going to be disappointing, and it should be disappointing. We should feel awe. We should have this feeling of like, oh, I'm giving up something. Because if we don't feel that, then maybe we should be preaching here today. Maybe we should be the ones that are telling the church how to be. Because humanity, in its corruption, does not want to give up an inch. We don't want to waver an inch of our corruption. We want to continue in it, and we want to make the whole world corrupt with us. And in fasting, we bring ourselves to a point of humility, where we say, whether I like it or not, whether the whole church likes it or not, we're going to fast, we're going to deprive ourselves so that we can come to Pascha and enjoy the grace of God. From the writings of the Desert Fathers, we read, Abba Isidore said, if you fast regularly, do not be inflated with pride. If you think highly of yourself because of it, then you had better eat meat. It is better for a man to eat meat than to be inflated with pride and glorify himself. We can't allow the fast to be a source of pride. If I fast and then I make some sort of snide comment, let's say, you know what, here, how about this? If I'm at the restaurant and I'm looking at the menu and saying, I don't really see anything here. And I call over the waitress and say, I'm an Orthodox Christian, it's Lent right now, and we really can't eat meat or dairy. What can I eat on the menu? That's boasting. Somebody who has no clue what fasting is still going to hear that and say, whoa, this person doesn't eat meat and dairy for all of Lent. Wow, okay. I know that because I made this mistake as a young person. I went in and I did exactly that, and this person was like, oh, wow, really? Wow. And they kind of started to praise me a little bit. This is a problem. This can steal our whole fast away from us, and it takes all of our spiritual labors that we're struggling for. So be very mindful of this. Sorry, did you have a question, Anthony?
No, just moving my glasses.
Be very mindful of this. Try to keep it in your mind that fasting is for me. Fasting is for me and God, and that alone. So if I start going around telling anybody, even if I come in to here on Wednesday night and I start complaining about the fast, for example, that's a form of boasting. I'm telling everybody else around me that I'm fasting. Christ tells us, put oil on your face so that your face can shine, so that you have light in it, so that people don't know that you're fasting. That even when we come into the church, we can't be like, yeah, it's Lent. Hold me accountable for this, because you'll see I will fall. I will be the first one to start dragging my feet through the holy fast. And this is why Christ gives us the fast, so that we can see our weakness, so that we can see the ways in which we fall into temptation. So use that. Use the temptations that the evil one throws against you to learn more about yourself. Also from the writings of the Desert Fathers, we read, Abba John the dwarf said, if a king wanted to take possession of his enemy's city, he would begin by cutting off the water and the food, and so his enemies, dying of hunger, would submit to him. It is the same with the passions of the flesh. If a man goes about fasting and hungry, the enemies of his soul grow weak. So, if we want to drive away the assaults of the evil one, especially the assaults against our physical person, then we have to fast. Even Wednesdays and Fridays, because a lot of people will say, once Great Lent is over and they've really gotten themselves into the mode of fasting, they'll say, oh my God, I can't believe we're not fasting anymore. I feel bad when I'm eating stuff now. Well, there's still Wednesday and Friday, and I'll tell you something, Wednesday and Friday on a regular basis becomes more difficult than doing the whole great fast. Because during Lent, we kind of set ourselves into this mode of, okay, it's Lent, if people invite me out to eat, I gotta be careful, and if we were a little more careful with things. But, if somebody invites us out to eat on a Wednesday, we might just say, oh yeah, sure. And then it might not even dawn on us that it's a Wednesday. Fasting during the entire year becomes almost more difficult than fasting at these little periods. So keep that in mind if you get that sense of like, oh, I wish there was more fast to be had. But what Abba John is telling us here is really pertinent, because the fathers of the church view fasting almost exclusively through this light, through the lens of how do we correct ourselves? How do we bring ourselves back to Christ? You know, the fasting is not just about deprivation. It's not just about surrendering of our own will. Fasting is about purifying ourselves. You know, meat is not impure. Eggs are not impure. Dairy is not impure. What is impure is that these foods give our flesh energy and give our flesh the ability to execute on the sins of the flesh. So by cutting off the fuel of the flesh, we cut off the sins that are also attacking the flesh. By making the flesh weak, we're unable to participate in the carnal passions. Do you see what I'm saying? But so the church is always working paradoxically. When the church takes something away from us, it's giving us something. It takes away meat and it gives us the grace to overcome the carnal passions. It takes away dairy and it gives to us the milk that nursed our Lord, that milk from His Holy Mother, that milk that is raining down on our church. This is the grace of the Mother of God that helps us persevere during the great fast. From St. Gregory of Sinai, we read, there are 3 degrees in eating: temperance, sufficiency, and satiety. Temperance is when someone wants to eat some more food but abstains, rising from the table still somewhat hungry. Sufficiency is when someone eats what is needed and sufficient for normal nourishment. Satiety is when someone eats more than enough and is more than satisfied. Now, let's go ahead and do a poll. How many of us in the room eat for temperance? Good. How many of us in the room eat for sufficiency? Okay. How many in the room ate for satiety? Alrighty, yeah. That's the thing. We as human beings, we love food. I know if there's any Arabs in the room, we always like to say, oh, Arabs love food. Nobody likes food like the Arabs. Everybody loves food. Every culture has delicious food because God gave us all of these beautiful, abundant resources around the globe. We collect all these beautiful resources, we put them together, and we make delicious food. We're taking the gifts of God and we're making something with them. At the end of the day, we're not doing anything bad, we're doing something beautiful. What is bad is when we take the abundance that God has given us and we say, God is going to keep giving. You know? The fast also helps to temper our materialism. Because like especially here, I mean, if you go to Kroger and you walk through all of Kroger, how much of the food inside of Kroger is necessary? And how much of the food inside of Kroger is just things we have because we can have them? I mean, there's 150 different ways to eat corn. Whatever seasonings you want, whatever finish, you want it in a tortilla, you want it in chips, you want it in this, you want it in that. There's a million different ways to eat corn. Do we need to have all of this? No, this is part of our human desire towards ostensity. St. Gregory continues, now if you cannot keep the first 2 degrees and you proceed to the 3rd, then at least do not become a glutton, remembering the words of the Lord. Woe unto you that you are full now, for you shall hunger. Remember also that rich man who ate in his present life sumptuously every day, but who was deprived of the desired bosom of Abraham in the next life, simply because of this sumptuous eating. So if we eat too much, if we overeat, maybe that's going to take away from us the life that's to come. You know, maybe in our overeating, we are expressing an overabundance of love for this world. And in expressing this overabundance of love, what happens? we lose our love for Christ. We lose our love for Christ every time that we find ourselves more in love with the world. So, food is worldly. Now, there's stories from the lives of the saints. I can recall a story from St. Joseph the Hesychast, and he says that sometimes in the winter on the Holy Mountain, food would become really scarce. And occasionally, some of the monasteries would send up some rusks, which are like dried ends of bread. And they would send these rusks up to him for him to eat, and he would, graciously accept them. But one winter, there was the whole Holy Mountain was really struggling with food that year. So Elder Joseph was almost getting no food. So what did he do? He started praying to St. John the Forerunner. And he says to St. John the Forerunner, he says, "There's nothing to eat. Please ask our Lord to provide." And what happens? The next day, he wakes up, and there is a big bag right outside of his cell full of food. When we need food, when we actually need food, God is going to provide that for us. God will give us all of the material things we need to sustain ourselves, whether that's through another person or mysteriously through his saints. If we always find ourselves making sure that I have the ability to fulfill my material needs, I am always the one providing for my material needs, are we trusting on God? Are we relying on God's mercy? The fast gives us this opportunity to embrace a life that otherwise we might not be able to live. That's the life that the monks live all the time, a life of asceticism, a life of spiritual struggle. So let's embrace the spiritual struggle and use it for our benefits. St. Maximus the Confessor says, "Almsgiving heals the soul's insensive power. Fasting withers sensual desire. Prayer purifies the intellect and prepares it for contemplation of created things. For the Lord has given us commandments which correspond to the powers of the soul." That is, the Lord has given us the commandments to correct our souls. The commandments exist so that we can know what it is that ails our soul and how we can make sure that our soul can be freed from its ailments. So we talked last week about the intellect, right? You remember when I had you all do the little exercise and I said, put your hands on your knees, and I said, how you can feel your knee? That's your intellect. So that is what we are supposed to do. We're supposed to bring that intellect, cultivate it, purify that intellect through our fasting. What does that also bring to us? It means that when we engage with one another, we're going to be purified. One time when I was visiting St. Nectarios Monastery in New York, one of the people with me had never been to a monastery before, and one of the monks had given them a hug, and they were like, "That was the softest, nicest hug I've ever had." And really and truly, if we fast and we prepare ourselves to lead Christian lives, not only is Christ going to transform our souls, Christ is going to transform all of us to the point that we really do become these very soft, gentle people. That the way of our life becomes the way of our being. There's a book by I believe he's Serbian, Elder Thaddeus of Vidavonica. It's called Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives. It's a great book, and essentially his entire argument is the way we think is the way we live. So if my thoughts constantly denigrate other people, then my entire way of living is going to be a way that denigrates other people. If my thoughts are constantly happy and focusing on Christ, then my entire way of being will be happy and focused on Christ. In a way, the fast is a magnifying glass on this whole principle, because we'll start to notice that by fasting, by changing the way that we live, our thoughts also transform. So by forcing the reverse cycle, We force ourselves to say, I can't change the thoughts, let me change the habits. And we change the habits, the thoughts are going to change with them as well. That's the harder approach, but that's the approach that we have now with the Great Fast. Finally, also from the Desert Fathers, it says, an old man was asked, how can I find God? He said, in fasting, in watching, in labors, in devotion, and above all, in discernment. I tell you, many have injured their bodies without discernment, and have gone away from us having achieved nothing. Our mouths smell bad through fasting. We know the scriptures by heart. We recite all the Psalms of David, but we have not that which God seeks, charity and humility. So, this is about the desert monks. These are hardcore, serious monks. If these monks had fasted and prayed and knew the entire scriptures by heart and the Psalms of David, but they didn't have charity and humility, so it was all useless. So remember this. While we're fasting, be charitable too. Take the meat that you're not buying and give it to someone else. Take the dairy that you're not buying and give it to someone else. Now, I don't mean go hand somebody on the street a gallon of milk. They might not have any place to put it. But if you take the money that you were going to spend and you give that to somebody on the street, that's also a great way. If you take the time that you were going to spend eating some extravagant meal and you go take that time to just give some of your time to somebody who's sitting alone on the street, that is a form of charity, and that is in a way a form of fasting, because we're taking from ourselves, we're taking our own time and we're giving it to someone else. So in closing, I want to share with you all a story about myself, not to boast or anything, but as a warning sign. And I think you'll understand why once I'm done with this. So, at some point in my life, I was, this is during a nativity fast, I was not keeping a very good fast this year, and I decided after one of the church services to go get a pizza. I was like, I'm gonna go get a pizza. So I go and get a pizza, and as I'm leaving this pizza shop, a homeless person comes up to me, and I was wearing my cassock, and they come to me and they say, oh, Father, help me, I'm just trying to go, I'm trying to do this and that. You know what I did? I gave him a hug, I brought him in, I said, come on, let's sit down and eat. It was cold, we sat in my car and we ate pizza. And you know something? When all was said and done, we said our goodbyes, we sat there for maybe about half an hour, said our goodbyes. He walked away, and I turned a bit, and then I looked again, and he was gone. And I was going to say something else to him, so I got out of my car, and I went looking for him, and there was not a single soul in sight, not a single person. Now, I cannot say that that was Christ, but for me, that was Christ. Where Christ was there, and he said, okay, you're being disobedient to the church, you're going to go break the fast, can you at least see my image in somebody else? You know? Because that, at the end of the day, is what we're called to do. Fasting is to help us become better Christians. So when we are confronted with like the hardest moments of our fast, maybe even if we break our fast, take that and say, you know what, Lord, forgive me. I'm going to go take my broken fast and I'm going to multiply it by giving everything the same way that I broke the fast. Let me give that to all the people that need it. The same way that I broke the fast, let me go take that pizza and give it to somebody else. You know, just something to keep in mind for us during the fast. So, I think that's all I have to share on fasting. If anybody has any questions.